Well, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Angel Hoekstra, and I'm here with Ms. Bethany Wilcox to present with you today. Doug Duncan will be joining us after he finishes teaching in about 20 or 30 minutes. Life of the academic, right? Rushing from one engagement to the next. So I would ask if you have questions that you hold them until the question slide. We've got a slide about halfway.
I have a question.
That was an error.
That's fine. I was told this was an informal group, so hopefully I'm prepared. So we're talking with you today about assessing correlations between clicker use, note-taking methods, and learning outcomes in 3 large science courses here at CU Boulder. Okay, first of all, we have two primary sources of funding for this study. The first one is the Center for the Integration of Research, Teaching, and Learning. This is a National Science Foundation funded sort of teaching and learning community of STEM graduate students and some faculty. It's basically professional development and teacher training for STEM graduate students. There's a branch here at CU Boulder. This group, CERTL, is also at 5 other campuses around the country. And so if you have questions about CERTL or about doing a teaching as research project, which is what we're talking about today is an example of a CERTL-funded teaching as research project, please feel free to come talk with me. We work for TAR projects, they're called, with kind of STEM graduate students who are interested in working with a faculty mentor, designing a project assessing learning in a classroom. It's usually the faculty member's classroom. The graduate student writes a proposal, gets IRB approval, and sort of runs the project. But it's a good way to teach graduate students about proposal writing, how to get one through the IRB, as well as learning about assessing learning outcomes. And our second funding source is the President's Teaching and Learning Collaborative. This is here on CU Boulder campus as well. We actually have the head of that here, Miss Marianne Shea is over there. If you have questions for her, you can ask her through email, and she also brought several materials, which are located here in the middle of the table and on the ends here. There's an overview of what the PTLC does here, a recent call for proposals, as well as a short article that's written by one participant. So if you don't know about the PTLC, a lot of faculty do consider this a really good opportunity for development and some funding here on campus. So this is primarily, I think, this is more aimed at graduate students, where this is a little more aimed at faculty. So if you have questions, feel free to ask Marianne or myself at the end. All right, our project explores the effects of technology use for interactive and interpretive behavior in higher education. What we're doing is correlating note-taking methods, students' method, whether they are a laptop note-taker, a traditional sort of paper note-taker, or of the smaller camp of students who don't take notes at all, who prefer to sit and listen. And we decided to write a study to correlate this method with learning outcomes. This is an offshoot of my dissertation research, which was done here at CU Boulder on looking at interactive and interpretive behavior as prompted by clicker use here on campus. So we're talking more broadly about technology use in the classroom in this talk today, but if you're interested in the effects of clickers across different disciplines, my dissertation work looked specifically at this. What I did is I compared clicker use in many different courses over about 4 years, and I really compared the effects of the use for our student attitudes and sort of behavior in the classroom between natural science courses and social science courses. I'm a sociologist. I'm trained in social psychology and looking at interactive behavior. So what I did is I went in as someone who isn't a scientist but has been trained in science all my life and compared kind of outcomes across, in this case, clicker use for different disciplines. So if you want to talk with me, you're welcome to email me about that as well. Okay, here are the researchers. First of all, Doug Duncan is coming shortly, as I said. He was on my thesis committee, and we are co-PIs on the study. As I said, this is an extension of my dissertation research, which I've kind of broadened now to look at the effects of technology, period, in the classroom, because we've gone beyond sort of clicker use and into sort of how does the use of all technologies affect students' sort of learning behavior, interactive behavior, and learning outcomes in the classroom. And I will hand it now off to Ms. Wilcox, who will tell you about herself.
So my name's Bethany. I'm a first-year graduate student in physics right now. So in addition to being one of the 2 RAs on this project, I am also a teaching assistant in physics. I also had the pleasure of doing my undergraduate here at CU, and I was a part of the Learning Assistant program, and I was able to work as an LA both for the APS department with Dr. Doug Duncan as my professor, and also in the physics department with Mike Dubson as my professor. So we wanted to start out with just a little bit of background information, kind of what motivated the study. We wanted to thank Diane Sieber, who is a professor in the engineering department, for her observations, which kind of helped to motivate this study. As laptops and iPads and other electronic devices become more affordable and smaller. Students are increasingly bringing them into class and actively using them during lectures. So the question becomes, are they on task? And informal observations do suggest, as we might expect, that they are not always being used for class-related activities, things like note-taking, and they are in fact often being used for accessing social networking sites, online shopping, and even playing flash games in class. So what becomes the question is whether or not these distractions actually are adversely affecting student outcomes. And students may believe that they are multitasking, but research does suggest that they are not multitasking nearly as well as they think that they are, and they are in fact just dividing their focus, and it could have a serious negative effect. So the question is, are these affecting outcomes? Are these affecting people's grades when they use laptops as note-taking methods in class? And another similar question is, do laptops and other digital devices distract other students in the class from being able to focus? So what Diane Sieber did is, in an attempt to kind of answer this question, is kind of an informal study, formative assessment on her students, where she tracked the exam grades of students that she just visually saw who used digital devices consistently before exams, and compared them to students who did not use digital devices. She's done this for about 5 semesters, gotten consistent data from each of the times, and what she's observed is that students who use laptops can have as much as a 10% to 13% lower exam scores than students who do not. Another thing that this slide is courtesy of Diane. She also has in this 4th column over here, and over here, she's looked at students who switched in the middle of the semester, students who stopped using laptops, and she did note that there is an improvement in the test scores as students stop using laptops throughout the semester. So what we wanted to do is to take this question and go a little bit more in depth and do some more formal structured things with it. And
these are the courses that we studied. So what we did is we wrote a formal study on this, and we did get IRB approval to do this. And we studied 3 courses during the fall semester this previous fall. One was a geology course, and then 2 astronomy courses. All these courses were taught by men who had experience. These are clicker courses, so all 3 of them use clickers to create an active, engaging learning environment. As a matter of fact, we had observed some of these courses in the past because we had taught with them, and some of them were observed for my dissertation research, so we're kind of familiar with the format of the courses. And we decided to take a look at these 3 to see if this differed by the amount of lecture note posting that was going on. So as you can see, in geology, the lecture notes were posted before class, whereas we had an astronomy course where they were posted after class, and then one where they were not posted at all. And we wanted to see if note posting also had something to do with this, right? Whether or not students felt the need to take notes and how motivated they were based upon kind of whether notes were posted. The other thing I might want to mention here is all 3 of these courses were large courses. They all enrolled over 100 students. Yeah, go ahead.
On your previous slide, do you know how active Diane Sieber's class was? Clickers involved? Group discussion?
That's one of the questions we had, and I know that Doug has the answer to that question, but we couldn't get a hold of Diane today to ask her.
Diane's
So
very active in her classroom.
We can ask
so
her.
no
I don't know
question
if
about
it is a clicker course, though, and that's something we want to be careful not to transpose here, because if, for example, if she teaches this is a non-clicker course, and all 3 of ours are clicker courses, then we've got kind of a different situation, because they're,
It is a non-clicker course.
It is a non-clicker course?
I was a TA for that class.
Okay, so there's our answer then. And so, but the question becomes, you can use interactive pedagogical strategies in a non-clicker course, just like you can with clickers. So the question is, how often were they being used? I mean, I don't know if you can speak to that, whether there's a lot of small group work, or mostly lecture, or...
Mostly lecture work in this, but Diane is very interactive with the students. She knows students by their first names and knows their personalities and skills, and so can call them and bring their life experiences into the class. So she's very interactive with the students.
She must know them well, because she said she identified their laptop use just by, I know which students are using them, which means it may not be too big of a course, otherwise she knows them very well. If out of 100 you can tell me reliably who's using laptops, that's pretty good. Go ahead. All right, so moving on. So let me talk a minute about the study design. And the design really came out of my dissertation research, which was an exploratory study looking at clicker use, comparing it for interactive interpretive behavior across disciplines. Because it was an exploratory study for me, no one had ever looked at, what is the difference between clicker use in, say, chemistry and astronomy courses versus sociology and journalism courses. These are the 4 disciplines that I studied for my thesis. I decided to do a mixed methods approach. So what we used in this study is an extension of that. We started with observation notes. We had one each of the women on the study, myself, Bethany, and Lee Allen, who's here also, went and observed each course. Each woman observed one course 10 times, and in one case 11, throughout the semester. We moved around in the classroom to sit in different places. And what we did is observe, we took notes on anything having to do with note-taking, student behavior, laptop use, instructor behavior, anything like that. So we had 100 pages of notes. It kind of worked out nicely, exactly 100 pages. Over 31 observation dates, and as I said, we recorded both quantitative and qualitative data. So we'd record, how many clicker questions were used, how far spaced apart were they, how many laptops did we count open in the classroom at different times, things like that. The second part of the study is survey questions. We asked questions twice throughout the semester, 23 in total, and we had 345 students reliably respond for a 77% response rate across the 3 courses. The questions requested demographic data, as well as, for the most part, student attitudes about learning, about clicker use, about laptop use, about cell phone use, all of those things. Observation prompted us to write the second round of questions, which was about 7 or 8. When we got into the classrooms, we observed way more texting and cell phone use going on than we ever really realized was the case. I teach myself. I've been teaching here for 7 years. And I think when you're standing up and speaking, it's very easy. Occasionally you'll see one and go, oh gosh, it distracted me. Can you please put that away? But for the most part, they're under their desks texting and playing in a way that you never notice until you're sitting among them and watching it go on and go, wow. So we wrote some questions to address that were asked, about 8 or so that were asked the week after Thanksgiving, that specifically addressed its cell phone use and texting and how distracting is it. And then what we did is we went in and interviewed 24 students across the 3 courses about their experiences with laptop use, devices, whether they thought it was possible to be addicted to your cell phone, any kinds of questions like that we thought might be relevant to the study. We had 16 paper note takers, 5 laptops, and 3 non-note takers. And this is pretty well representative of the larger sample from which this is drawn. So our observation data correlates fairly well with our survey data, which shows that across the 3 courses, about 65-70% of students took notes on paper, 10 to 15% electronic device users. This seems low, but when you want to think about this, a lot of students told us in interviews, yes, I own a laptop, I don't bring it to class because I know I'll play on it. I know I cannot have my laptop and take notes on it and not play on it, so I just won't use it. We also recorded instances of students coming in, using their laptops at the beginning of class before announcements, and then when the teacher finished announcements, closing the laptop, and then taking notes on paper the rest of the class. So this is definitely there. And then some that didn't take notes at all. And that also depended on whether the notes were posted. Obviously, if the notes are posted before class, a lot more students don't take notes than if they're posted after or not at all. So here are some of our preliminary findings. First of all, observation confirms far and away that students regularly engage in non-course related playing or web browsing during class. They do this on laptops, but they do it a lot on their wireless phones. For example, in 100 pages of observation notes, we recorded 97 incidents of cell phone use, 97 references over 100 pages to students picking up their cell phone, doing something with it, and putting it down. That's one instance. Then what we did is about halfway through, we started going, there's so much texting going on, so much web browsing on the phones. We're going to try to start taking some case studies of who we're sitting around. So if I went in, for example, and I sit down in a class, I mark where I am in the class on my diagram that day, I'm going to observe these 6 students around me. What are they doing? If I observe student C right here that I can see pick up her phone once, I started making a tick mark. Okay, female student in the row above me uses her phone once. Tick, 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 tick throughout the course. I think the largest number of text counts we had for one student was something like 16 or 18 in a 50-minute class period. So this is definitely going on. It's definitely going on.
So what fraction of the students in the class are texting?
You'll see this.
That's on the next slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, let's just move to that. So
Actually, sorry, go back just to clarify the last data point.
this data point here is just a small estimate based on what we call those text counts.
But that was, so of the students
We
who
could
are
see-
texting, they are texting 7 times each.
On average
Yes.
per class, and that was just the students that we could see through observation notes in the kind of case study we did with the students sitting around us. So this kind of gives you a heuristic, but it doesn't include the students who weren't texting, and it doesn't include the ones across the classroom that we couldn't see. So this is just a guesstimate. So what we did is we took survey data. This is what prompted the survey question. Go ahead. This was one of the ones that was taken in the second round after Thanksgiving break. So we asked them, okay, observation data shows this is an ethnographic study, we need to ask this question. We go in and ask it. Here's the data. If you use your phone, how often do you use it? This is student self-reported data, and we also think to some extent they're not going to be wonderful at reporting how often they use it, right? What I think is interesting is that many of them are some are willing to agree, look, I'm using my phone more than 10 times. I'm willing to say it, it's anonymous, I don't care. By the way, this question was fully anonymous. We asked them to trade clickers with a neighbor so that no one would know what they said, including the professor, that no one could ever pull up who said what, to try to get this as anonymous as possible. And I still think these numbers may be low because they may just not know how often they're using them.
Or that they really own a
Thoughts?
cell phone?
And then the question is, yes, of course, so either you're never, or I don't want to admit it. I don't want to admit this, or, I don't own one.
Is there a geographical distribution? I mean, people who sit near the front, do they use less than people who sit in the back?
We don't really have data on that.
No.
I don't
The
think.
data I can give you would suggest, if they're in the front row in interviews, they'll say, well, I try not to sit in the front row if I want to use my phone. But by far and away, if you're interested in this, from what I recall from interviews, the students said a lot. It depends on the instructor's policy. If the instructor doesn't have a policy about not using phones or laptops, then who cares? They'll say some instructors are very strict and some aren't. Well, in order not to bias our data, we asked all 3 instructors who participated here to not make announcements asking them, please don't play with your phone, please don't go off task on your laptop. So in this case, we may have affected the data that way because we didn't allow them in a way to have a policy about not using them. So
This is the native behavior.
This is the behavior
That's
of
right.
natives,
That's right.
absolutely.
And I'm surprised it's actually so low. The use is low.
but they're reporting low. And I think some of that just may be not wanting to admit or not being able to assess your own use very well.
So do you think that they're reporting low based on your observations?
Clarify your question, because there's 2 ways to report low. There's reporting low in these bins,
Are they
and there's reporting low in this bin. Okay? So in other words, some people could conceivably be using a phone and saying, I don't. I think that's unlikely. But I do think it's likely that people
Yes, okay.
tend
I see you're making that distinction.
to underestimate.
If they are using their phone to do
Think
something,
about-
they tend to underreport? Is that your gut feeling, or do
It
you have
is
some
because
data?
they want to conform with appropriate student role behavior, right? So the student role behavior ideally would say you're not supposed to be using your phone at all during class. So they think to themselves, they're not taking into account this group, for example. Okay, someone texted me 1 time during class. What are you doing after class? Oh, you want to meet up for lunch? Oh, where? Okay, 2 lines, and they put it down. They may be saying, I've never used it, when in fact we've observed them using it, but they're not putting themselves here. They can pick it up and use it really quickly and put it down. And so the thing about that is that's an instance for us, but it may not be to them. If mom just says, are you meeting me at 3? Yes, I am. That's still an instant of use, but they may not be thinking of that when they're answering something like this on a survey.
Furthermore, saying that I use my cell phone once or twice per class, if I texted my friend 8 times, but it was just one friend, that
I
was
see.
one use.
And it was just one
Yeah, there you go.
It was one thread. You just kept talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Maybe
so,
that's
so
why.
this counting is, I would definitely agree it's got to be an under.
I think the only way to get really good data with this would be to videotape the class, have observers watch the videotape and mark, who's picking up their phones and when. And then the question becomes, how do you do that for a 100-student class? Can you get an image that's big enough? Yeah,
This
so-
was done once at Cornell. There's something in the literature. It was done at Cornell, but not with phones, with laptops, where they somehow were able to capture all the electronic traffic.
Laptops are bigger than cell phones.
Easier to see.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Harder to hide.
Harder to hide.
Question?
Of course, ultimately, I want to know correlation of outcome with
Yes.
We're getting there.
Let's move forward.
Call for moving forward.
Let's move forward and skip the next one. Yeah. Go ahead and skip that one. All right, this is you.
Well,
All right, we're
okay.
gonna hand it off. I'd actually switch with you. How's that?
Okay. So remember, we have 3 classes that we're studying. We will refer to them as the geoscience class and astronomy 1 and astronomy 2. Here they are, okay? These are the class grades. Slight caveat. They're either the class grades or they're the total of all the exam scores, and those two are very, very close to each other, okay? So anyway, the grades are on the bottom, and then paper note takers are blue. This funny maroon are the electronic, and no notes at all are the yellow. And those are the distributions.
So
There you have the mean and the standard deviation of the mean.
They're not normalized the same way.
they must
No,
be.
they're sorry. They are raw numbers,
Okay, well,
okay?
it still looks weird.
Clearly shifted to the left of the yellow curve, and yet it has the same.
Sorry, which do you think is shifted?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is.
So
81 versus
the
84.
shift
The
is
mode and the
about 2 on the grading scale of 100, and the uncertainty of the mean of the distribution is 1.5 and 2.5 for the smaller sample. Okay. If you run a t-test of the blue of all 3 distributions,
You're
there's
telling me that the mean of the blue and the mean of the yellow are within 2 points of each other?
Yeah.
It doesn't look like that way, but maybe they're just not normalized.
Yeah, I think that,
The yellow sure seems, anyway, it's hard to tell.
they would like be.
I can check.
I mean, Steve, that yellow, the blue bar is only 3 people higher than the yellow bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I ran the stats with Excel. I will certainly check them.
It's just visually, it's very arresting.
Doug,
yes.
why did you say it's either the sum of the test scores or the course grade?
Did
Oh,
you get the same
we sort of went back and forth. The classes typically 3/4 of the grade were on exams, and then 25% were things like some labs or something that had nothing to do with what went on in the classroom. And so we didn't know whether it would be better to correlate with what went on in the classroom alone or with the overall grade. It turns out it doesn't matter. Okay.
They're so close.
Okay,
Yeah.
more clarification. So a student is characterized, an individual student is either a paper note taker or an electronic note taker. Are students really that consistent across
No.
the semester?
Some of them switch. Okay, now, so we have quite a bit more data analysis to do. And so we actually haven't decided how to subcategorize the electronic people if they switched from electronic to paper.
And how do you know? I thought you were just doing scattered observations.
We asked them with the clicker questions 3 or 4 times throughout the semester. Self-indication. What note-taking method are you using?
Once each
What
month.
note-taking method are you? What note-taking method are you using today?
Yes, yeah, and that's quite important. So there's
Yes.
no memorizing. I mean, trying
Do
to
I
remember.
use it most of the time,
No.
or 50%
3
of the
times.
time? Or?
3 times about a month
Okay.
apart. First month, second month, third month. We said, "Are you taking notes today?
And
how?"
if so, how?
Okay. But Steve raises a good point. This is a plot where they're characterized by the final of those 3 months. Okay. We've got the 3 months. We haven't decided how to do
What to do with the few that
What to
switched.
do with the switchers.
So can you say that
It
again?
doesn't matter though.
It's the last survey.
It's
That's
the
what
last
that is.
one.
Survey
Yep.
date. That's
Okay.
correct.
So what they were doing, what they reported they were doing towards the end of your
Correct.
period.
Correct.
It doesn't look like it's going to matter.
So let's move to the
hard
next
to
one, you
know.
think?
Yes.
Should we move to the next one? You can show?
Please. Yep. Okay. Get the same results in astronomy class number 1.
But there's a lot more people.
Oh, go back.
Back up.
In this class, there are a lot more people percentage-wise taking notes. Notice one systematic difference between the geoscience class. Here, the professor posts the notes after class.
I'm going to switch back a second.
Okay,
So this
so-
course
Yeah,
is
yeah.
before, this is the notes were posted before class. This is the geoscience course. So when notes are posted before, you can see it looks like there are just less note takers, period, which makes sense, right? If you post notes before, many of them feel less motivated to take them.
This is number? Was it numbered on the next graph, or was it
Uh-huh.
percent?
I think it's.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Those are the absolute numbers.
Okay.
Okay. So, percentage-wise, a lot more people are taking notes, but of the ones that take their notes electronically or don't take notes, again, no statistically significant difference in exam performance. Now, we actually asked this question. There were actually four.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm still struggling with the identification of note taker, electronic, and no note.
Okay.
Because it's such a critical part of this
Right.
analysis, and yet
So-
we don't know if they. So, do you have any measure of consistency? Like, what percentage of the students consistently reported the same note-taking method?
We absolutely will
throughout the
calculate
semester?
that data.
We did it about once each month for 3 months.
For 3 months.
Three
We have
different
3 data
times
points.
we asked them. And of those, there's a group that always use laptops.
Always used laptops.
But
I
there's-
thought you said this was the last.
But that's what
survey.
he's
That's-
showing, but I think they have the
I'm
other
showing
data.
the third of the 3 times we asked them, okay? But if somebody was using paper earlier, and then when we asked them they're using a laptop on that day, they're going to show up in the laptop bin,
In this graph.
in this graph.
That's correct.
Okay? We don't know what to do with the switchers yet. We're open to suggestions and we're thinking about that.
Well, I mean, but no difference is no difference. I mean,
Well-
unless they happen to be setting themselves off
No
in some
difference
switch.
could be
But-
white noise. I mean, no difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because in this class, for instance, there's only 11 people on laptops. And let's say the previous month, this number was 9. Okay, so those 2 people are in the bin for electronic note-taking, but a month before they were using paper.
Yeah, so that, I mean, but you're...
Are those 2 people, or are they a different 2 people?
Oh, we have all the students identified.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, no, all the students are identified by number.
I'll stop worrying.
Okay,
Well,
so
and you're making an excellent point, and we absolutely will address that as we go into more analysis.
Depends upon a
Yeah.
careful understanding of who's taking notes
Absolutely.
and their grade
With-
over time. That's what I'm saying.
Right. With the exception of it, however, it's going to be a really screwy case, and that would be fascinating too if you find it that the switchers have some, really different characteristics than the average of each of the groups that exist within here. I mean,
So a related question to that would be, can you characterize the exams in these 3 classes? Because an exam, which is a largely factual or, level 1 Bloom's taxonomy test, which is testing your ability to recall your notes, I would expect would yield very different grade patterns than a highly conceptual course, which is asking students to interpret and sense make on exams. So I would also want to understand what is being measured by this.
I have studied 2 of the classes, not surprisingly, the 2 astronomy classes. And I would rate their exams as pretty conceptual, also including a large fraction of essay writing, where students have to just write it down and it's not multiple choice at all. So I would say that the 2 astronomy classes, and I'm not making a judgment on geoscience because I haven't studied it, are pretty conceptual.
I can speak to that. So the geoscience professor is a seasoned, tenured professor in the department here who is very involved in teaching and learning, and who incorporated clickers into his course. He told me because he wanted to move more toward conceptual use, students being able to apply concepts across context rather than the sort of Bloom's taxonomy level 1, just can you answer factual information. So my guess is, given his sort of involvement in the teaching learning community here, as well as his use of clickers and sort of involvement in this community, that he probably also as well writes that way. He's one of the few professors I observed over the course of the 8 or so years I've been observing clicker use that actually brought his exam questions in after the exam and spent a whole class period with the students, allowing them to ask questions about which ones they missed, and saying, we're going to have a few clicker questions today to encourage you to come to class. But he spent almost a whole class period just going through the exam over what they went wrong, what conceptually they didn't understand. I mean, to take a whole class period like that, I think communicates pretty well that you're invested in teaching and learning and doing so at a higher level.
So it's probably worth our saying to everybody here, we find these results, which we just had, for a few days, surprising, challenging, but we're showing you the real data. Okay, so the purpose of this is to let you go ahead and struggle with it the way we are. Now you're going to see that we actually did find a couple of correlations that are significant. They're just not the ones you're asking about and the ones that we expected to find. To be really clear about what Valerie said, even though this was anonymous from the instructors, we tracked every single student all the way through.
Yeah.
So every student's identified by an ID number, and we've got their grades on all their exams and their class grades, and the 3 times that they responded, how are you taking notes today?
And they tend to be consistent except for a few that...
Well, I would say that the number that switch is typically a third, and they switch both ways.
Yes, yeah.
Is it just like I brought my computer today to take notes on, and I didn't the next day, so I'm going to just take paper notes? I mean,
Or today is the day that you got to finish that paper for that
So you're doing what I'm doing. And sorry.
Yeah, you know, I have to take my invisible hat off to both Angel and Bethany and Lee, to all of you, because the observations were just so valuable. You know, there was a lot of behavior that we never put in the original survey. And that's a perfect example. When somebody says, oh, they're mostly a paper note taker, but they got a paper to finish this week. And so they're on the laptop.
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's real life. So the reason we tried to get a large sample, and it's still not large enough, is to beat down some of this random noise.
Which is what I would like to see the value of the dependence, the consistency of those note takers.
Sure,
And those
sure.
are almost like the only data I would use, because
Well,
if you're using that end of the
If you're going to try and get a different
class,
number out of this, though, you're going to have to argue that those switchers are exactly offsetting one another, since the averages here are the same and the distributions are fairly normal.
Well, you know, for instance, here's the number 11.
You're right.
So the third time we asked, 11 people in this class were taking notes on laptops. If we insisted that all 3 times they were taking notes on laptops, this number 11 would go down to, I think, 7.
Right.
And then the square root of n gets pretty low, so it's really hard. Hey, Fran. Yeah.
I think you're all barking up the wrong tree.
Right.
It's not an issue of note-taking, it's just as your observations. The technology has moved on. The issue now is texting. It's not note-taking in computers. And, you know...
We're getting there, actually.
So
Yeah, let's go there.
Fran's suggestion is consistent with the data, but just to make life interesting, let me toss out one other thing that's consistent with the data. And that is that after 3 or 4 years of students bringing laptops to class, students are getting smarter and realize what they can and can't do. So we don't have any observation that says students are using laptops the same way that they were 4 years ago. We didn't actually try and see if the laptops had Facebook open or not.
Right.
So both those, I tend to go with Fran's idea, but it's not the only way to explain the data.
Actually, there's another point I'd like to raise, which
Sure.
is you've got those who don't take notes. And I think the interesting question is going to be those who don't take notes because this material is trivial for them. Those who don't take notes because they think it's cool not to take notes, and they don't need to take notes.
Yeah.
And I think what would be very interesting would be to find out those who don't take notes and should be taking notes.
Yeah. So Fran has ESP, and now I'm going to confess to everybody, I did not slip Fran $20.
That's because she's an astrologer.
Don't show me yet,
Okay.
But we made a stab at that. We didn't do it as wisely as we would knowing what we know now, but we asked the no note takers to put themselves into one of 2 bins. Okay? And I'm going to try and remember the exact wording of the question. Maybe you guys can help me. But one bin they could have chosen was, no, I don't take notes, I just sit and listen. And the other bin was, I don't take notes because the professor posts them.
So we tried to divide them into those 2 groups.
So if you look at the
wanna-
next histogram,
Is that it or is it? Yep, here it is.
those are not at all the same. Okay? The ones who say, I can just listen because the professor posts the notes, are a big shift to lower grades than the ones who say, just listen. I have no idea what this means exactly.
So is it active listening or is it passive listening? Do they go to notes afterwards or not? I mean, there's a bunch of factors here. Are they majors in the field, even though it's all three of these are non-major course? You know, are they a major taking it anyway, or are they just sitting, you know, who knows what's going on with that?
Oh, it couldn't be, let's see.
Or major's not allowed to enroll? That's a question I don't know.
There can't be more than a couple of majors snuck into these classes.
Okay, I'll make a prediction. My prediction is that those yellow bars, I listen because the notes are posted. They're the people who think science is memorization fact-based only, so that I can come along and memorize the material later. And those who say I just listen are the ones who think the material is fairly straightforward, and they do listen, they are engaged.
Yeah.
Because they get better grades.
Well, this is brand new, and we're, yeah. Okay, why don't I show you the data from the third class?
We had an MRI machine on these guys.
Well, there's so many questions that we would ask them now if we knew then what we knew now, but that's why you do a pilot study, right?
It's also part of the reason that we did qualitative and quantitative methods, because we were able to use qualitative methods to inform us halfway through to make it a better, more comprehensive study. And if we had just, for example, surveyed them and just used the clicker scores and the exam grades, we wouldn't have all these other ways to show you what other questions we're trying to address. There's a lot going on here. So,
Has anybody done a factor analysis on, factors that load to exam performance? Because I could imagine doing homework is far greater than note taking.
Besides David Pritchard?
Yeah, right.
I think he's done such a...
Right. I think my point is that these are rich environments, and we're making all kinds of inferences about the causal nature of our educational practice here, when there are lots of other features that are going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So here's the third and final class. The same coding, paper, electronic, no notes. The numbers are fairly small, and so the standard deviation of the means it can be pretty large for the laptop users here. So it is not even statistically significant that the laptop users are below the others in the class. It's certainly not any large effect. So 3 different classes to first order are showing the same thing. Unlike the practice that motivated our study, where there was a very big difference between the laptop users and not. Now, it's also worth remembering that study was about 3 years ago now. So it is consistent with laptop users wising up a little bit.
But so I'm confused. In Diane's study, it wasn't about laptop use for taking notes. It was about laptop distraction. I thought that Diane's laptop users were by and large looking at things that they were not taking lecture notes.
Right.
So now they're using their cell phones for their email, and they're not using their laptops for email. So, or surfing the web, they're doing it all on their phone.
Well, we should make clear that we coded them into our using laptops to take notes, because we didn't want to communicate to them, are you being distracted by your laptop? How much are you playing on Facebook on it? But our observation data communicates very clearly that they are using their phones and their laptops to do a lot of other things, quite often. It's going on a lot.
Oh, so sorry, now I'm confused. When you say electronic note takers, do you mean people who were using their laptops to take notes, or just people who were using their laptops?
People who are using their laptops during class for the majority of class.
No, they're self-reporting on a clicker question.
I'm using it for notes.
I see. Okay.
So they wouldn't be, if they had used it at the beginning of class and closed it once announcements were over, then they wouldn't classify themselves as a laptop note taker.
No, if I'm playing Flash games, I would say I'm not taking notes.
Yeah, this is the thing.
Okay, so these are self-reported. All right.
The good news is there's no difference.
Okay, so
It doesn't matter anyway.
to put into this mix, we got one more plot. In this particular class, we are able to correlate cell phone use and grades. And the reason is, in this particular class, all the students were told this is an anonymous study, and anything that you report with your clicker is only going to be seen by the professors involved after grades are in, the next semester. And it's going to go to the researchers, okay? It was said in this class, if anybody doesn't believe what we just told you, you can swap your clicker with someone else randomly, but observation said that didn't really happen. Okay? So for this one class, I took those clicker questions. Do you use it 1 to 2 times, 3 to 5 times, each of those bins? And then the other group of people who say, no, I never use it or I don't own one. And I separated the data into 2 different bins and looked to see if there was any difference in the grades in this one astronomy class. And the red are the non-phone users, the blue are the phone users, and the sample size is here.
So how many texts?
Anyone who checked any of the bins that they use the phone is in blue.
You said only 30% were never used the phone.
That's in all 3 samples.
I see.
This is just from one course. It's
Half,
broken down.
so in this course, half the students say they never use a phone.
Correct.
Okay.
And was that consistent with your note taking?
Pardon?
With your notes?
I think that the part of the concern with this chart is that this came from the class where the students were pretty aware that that one of the professors was on the study. And so they may have said, I've never used my phone when in fact I was using it. I'm not sure, but...
But you guys have field notes. So in this class, did you use 50% use of cell phone?
Or 50% use of never using a phone.
You'd have to ask Lee that question.
Can we call you out, Lee?
This one happens to be yours.
This is your class.
I actually have my notes.
Well, this will take some analysis because you have to,
Quick analysis.
But qualitatively, would you say that you thought half of the people in that class never texted?
It was less than half. But the ones who did weren't consistent about using their phone. There was one famous student in particular that she texted, or she picked her phone up 20 times during the class period.
Now, it's hard to know, okay? We got a lot smarter as this study went on, and we realized that the behavior needed a lot more questions than we were originally asking. So these are fairly coarse bins, but at the very least, it seems to me they indicate several things that are urgent to follow up, right? I mean, there's a lot of this going on. How it's affecting the student performance, you're seeing the tip of the iceberg. Are these numbers precise? No, of course not. But is this group systematically pretty different from this group? My sense is it is.
Are these major specific courses, or are
These are all non-major.
They're all non-major courses. All 3.
Did you break these data out at all by number of reported, like high cell phone users, self-reported? I mean, so you have it bimodal.
Not yet.
No.
Not
Okay.
yet.
Curious.
So we took a risk coming to you all today because we're right in the middle of data analysis. This is the very beginning.
There's no risk. We're a bunch of fucking love hounds.
Well, look at the lively discussion, though. I mean, like taking a risk. That's wonderful.
We do it to each other all the time, though.
This is us
I
loving.
guess I would go back to something that Angel said about the qualitative study, and I think we shouldn't pass over this too lightly. The students were really looking toward the faculty member for policy. Don't forget, in these 3 classes, we were sworn to say nothing about laptops and cell phones. But even whether it's polite to use a phone or not, it depends on whether the professor said something. Now, that's probably not what the faculty member thinks, but that's pretty valuable.
We have that data. We brought
that.
it for you. So here it is. This was, I think, is really important. I think
every faculty member can.
most faculty who are not, maybe brand new or pretty, younger, assume, right? It's wrong to use your phone in class. It's a distraction. It's disrespectful. You shouldn't be using your phone. All the students know you shouldn't be using their phone. They told us in interviews and half of them in survey data. Unless the instructor tells me it's not okay to use my phone, I've had a phone in my hand since I was 8 years old. I use my phone all the time, all day long. I'm on the bus on my phone, whatever. So if you don't tell me not to use my phone, it must not be a problem.
So was this,
I don't find that surprising.
was this also a clicker question?
This was a clicker question as well.
In the survey.
Because I feel that.
So I'm seeing this a little bit, I'm sorry. I'm just noticing that the vast majority are saying there is an element of disrespect in me using my phone, no matter what the situation. That's what's really striking to me.
37.
Only 16% are saying something else, or it's not disrespectful at all.
That's true.
However, carrying it one step further, given a very large class, 200-person class, I'd like to know how many people would do it surreptitiously, even if you did have a policy up front, because
Say
go in the
at
back
least
of that room. Huh?
At least 7%. Is how I would read it.
Probably bigger than that.
Oh no, I mean to follow up on that point, I think this idea of my sense is it's not disrespectful if people don't know about it. I mean, I think that there's a certain sort of level to that, which is another question.
But I'm like surprised that we all think it's like disrespectful. That I feel a bias coming from you, that it's disrespectful to text. I don't know that. Exactly. Get my text.
Sorry, I wasn't listening.
I really am surprised. I know. I'm honestly and earnestly.
Despite the fact that 85% of the students are in agreement?
That is somewhat
Well, despite the
disrespectful.
fact that you're giving talks, this is what people are doing.
What the heck out of you?
I'm just surprised. Okay.
When they do it.
How many of you have ever been distracted giving a lecture because you saw someone texting while you were lecturing and had to take a moment to okay, where was I in my lecture now? Who's ever experienced that? Find texting distracting you yourself as the professor.
That wasn't the question that I was addressing.
Whether they are?
I was addressing how I feel as an end user. I wasn't talking about empathy or compassion. I was simply talking about what our culture has become and our behaviors. And when you're giving a presentation at any of your conferences or anywhere else, or even in this room, we're very comfortable using computers and phones. And so
And it's disrespectful.
Which is not disrespectful.
So, like,
Yes, I think being disrespectful is just great, you know.
I think Valerie's point is really important, but what it reminds me of is something we all know, but we rarely apply to ourselves, right? And that is any methodology you use, it's got to feel comfortable to you, right? And if it bugs the hell out of me that Noah's texting here, I would be a fool not to say that in the class. And so in my class, I have pretty extensive ritual discussion about behavior and also discussion about metacognition. What the heck are you doing with this time? Why are you using up 3 hours of my time every week? And why am I using 3 hours of yours? And those discussions are pretty rare. That's what's great about some of these interviews. Is the students actually answer the question, why do you take notes at all? What's supposed to be going on here? And maybe that's different for different people. As long as you agree with as long as your students know clearly, that seems very important, what your attitude is. Now,
your rules are.
my attitude is, if you don't want to engage directly with me, then buy Alex Filipenko on a DVD. Okay, you save yourself $30,000 tuition. You can get a really good astronomy professor on a DVD.
Not just for your course, but.
Yeah, I would like to bring us back to your study.
Okay.
So one of the things that strikes me about this study versus Diane's is the prominent use of self-identification and self-reporting from the students. And I would really like to know more about your field notes. So for instance, you probably don't know names of students, so your field notes cannot be used to identify whether students are truthfully, a reliability study of the clicker questions. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
are you
Correct.
during
Yes.
the clicker questions, you can't see what people are punching?
So we can't look up the grade of that one person who was texting 20 times a lecture.
No.
Not with this study.
Yeah. It
Might be
seems-
interesting
It
to
seems
know.
like this is an important element, is that self-reporting folds in people's attitudes about respect and what they think it means and what they think they're doing in a way that's simply, Diane's simple factual observation, were you or were you not engaged in this distracting activity, and did that affect your grade? It just seems like you might get a different result that way.
We also have the difference between 3 clicker courses versus a non-clicker course, and that's something else that we can't map onto one another. It's a different environment.
So I guess the other point that
Thank you.
I would make is that your data is, since it is self-reporting, you don't right now have the element of, do you find your use of this technology or others' use of this technology distracting?
We do have survey questions that address that.
Okay.
We just haven't analyzed the data yet.
Okay, because on this particular topic, I can say my advisor sits in a meeting with me, or a group meeting, or a departmental seminar, and reads Google Reader and all this other stuff on his phone. And then he asks the question of the person, not usually during seminar, but certainly during a group meeting, that someone has just discussed, because I can tell he has split his focus or he is not paying attention to the person who is speaking, right? I consider it disrespectful. Clearly he does not, and it's not like I can change his behavior by saying, hey, advisor, I'd appreciate it if you listen when I talk. But I think that there's kind of similar things.
Might not be the best.
I mean, I could Skype him, I guess, and see if I can
That's
reach him that way.
Text or talk to it while you're presenting.
Which could work. But
Excuse me, you're paying attention.
This particular one is kind of two issues, is that people may think it's respectful or not, but I think to me that's a separate issue then. Do you realize that it is distracting from you and your own performance level and others?
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, did you sense, even though you haven't analyzed the data, a possible generation gap between younger and older students? I can't remember where we discussed this, but that older students means 21, and younger students mean 17 or 18, because the freshmen...
You can tell by looking.
The freshmen now have never been without a cell phone. Okay, and what they consider rude, even behaving with each other, is different.
Well,
I'm sure in high school, they're much stricter than we are. I mean, are students allowed to use cell phones during class in high school?
They bring them to
think
Boulder High.
not.
I mean, the same thing is how you police that. I mean, you maybe only have 30 students, but I mean, I mentored 2 high school students, and I would get email from them occasionally during the day, and I didn't know whether that was, or text if that was during class or between classes. But I did get communications from them during school.
One thing I can say to that, and that is that when we went into the study, I expected to see a lot more laptop users than we actually counted. The laptop use was, depending on which course, somewhere between, 15 and 20% would be high of the users. I expected to see way more laptop users than that. And I think the answer to that question is that we all have wireless on our phones now, so we don't need laptops for wireless anymore. Yeah, it's not. This is not about the note. If I'm going to take notes, I'll just do it on paper because I got my phone right here, right? And the thing is, they are using texting. Texting's going on all over the place. It's going on everywhere. I observed a small class at Denver Metro State on a site visit last week, a 30-student class where students were openly texting with their phones on the desks in the middle of class. Many of them, the professor in a 25 or 30-student class never addressed it. Just didn't address it. So either she felt more like, I'm a user and I want to use my phone, so if you want to use yours, that's your own thing. Some people want to police classes more than others, right? Some people kind of like, it's your own problem. If you fix your grades, that's your own problem, right? But it is in the culture, absolutely.
I text while I teach.
Are you guys paying attention?
Here you'll see that.
So I was thinking about what this might mean in the future, because what I have seen is that at least in meetings where people are meeting remotely through online software, that there is actually an intentional space for back-channel communication, and all the communication is actually about the subject, about the meeting is about. And in fact, what happens though is that discussion gets so rich that you can really either follow that or you can follow the meetings, and even though it's really on topic, it still is a bit of a distraction from what's going on in the actual meeting. And I'm wondering if the students, I know this is your study, but perhaps some of them, one might wish, are actually discussing the course content with each other in the classroom and are not just simply being distracted by doing things that have nothing to do with the course.
Can I just... Oh, go ahead.
You're talking about a professional meeting.
I'm talking about
So the people who are typing in the back channel know what they're doing too.
But she's proposing that some of your students might be texting each other in the room.
No, I understand.
They absolutely are. I observed it going on.
Yeah, but about the course topic. The reason I think that's less likely is these 3 courses are pretty high on the interactivity scale, and there's lots of student-student discussion in the peer instruction. So they are being encouraged, every 8 or 10 minutes to turn to the person next to them and communicate. So,
Well, I wanted to, focus a little bit more on what's happening necessarily than the tools themselves by which this is happening. So, and I think you're really onto something which is key and important, which is this nature of distraction in class, as opposed to traction, I guess. that we're hoping for.
Yeah.
And there are many media by which that can happen. It used to be passing notes inside a classroom, and it may well be cell phones, but there are other, affordances of these cell phones where you can have a back-channel conversation in a dual-channel, sort of a rich background. We generally don't do that at the university. And so it would be very compelling for us to be able to look at your data and say, are those students who are texting and are distracted or off topic aren't doing as well by these particular measures.
Yeah.
But the flip side is I'd hate to throw out the baby with the bathwater and say that all technology in the classroom like this that allows that is bad.
Yeah. The Cornell study that I referred to,
I'm going to call time because I think we have somebody else. I don't know. I think I have this room before 4:30, but I'm being collegial. And just this once. There's an interesting thing that comes out of this, it seems to me, just so we have to come back, is that what's considered rude and not rude has changed a lot, right? So if I'm having a discussion with somebody and they answer their phone, I think that's rude.
Right.
And so if I'm talking to people and they're not listening to me, I think it's rude. As a teacher, if somebody asks a question, you say, well, I've answered that question, but I have to take my cell phone out. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to answer my phone. You think that was rude too. So I mean, it's a whole issue of what counts for social.
Right, and what's respectful on the teacher side too.
Well, absolutely. Okay.